So, hello everyone and welcome. My name is Allison Venuto, and I am one of the board members of American Pilgrims on the Camino. We are so grateful that you are here sharing your time with us today. We are going to hear about the mindful pilgrimage, and we are going to hear from Colleen and David from the northern area of Canada. So we are excited that they are here and sharing with us. And so with that, I am going to turn it over to David and Colleen.
Thank you very much, Allison. So let me just share my screen, but let me just get back up to the top here and we'll be ready to go in a sec. It's amazing though to see some of our American Pilgrim friends, and we are looking forward to seeing more of you at the Vancouver meeting in May. So that's just around the corner. But in the meantime, we've got something that we wanted to share with you, which is building on a conversation that we had back in September. But yeah, the Vancouver meeting's coming up soon, and we'll see a number of you, I'm sure, there.
So maybe pop it in the chat if you're planning to be in Vancouver, and we'll look for you.
So we're delighted to be invited to follow up on a chat that we had with Ivar Revke in Santiago in September. And it was on the subject of a Canadian initiative called the Mindful Pilgrim. And this started out simply as a little card that you see on the screen here that we have been giving out to Canadian pilgrims for a little while. And what we thought we'd do is just start out building on the idea of the mindful pilgrim, but by proposing that we cultivate a foundation of mindfulness first. So in fact, the essence of mindfulness is captured on the last line of this pilgrim card, which is be present in the moment. And so we're going to share some further thoughts on how walking in the Camino and mindfulness intersect in the form of some stories that we're going to tell from our last very unusual Camino, which Colleen will describe in a second. And spoiler alert, sometimes mindfulness and the Camino did not intersect, as we were seriously tested on this particular Camino. Now, I hasten to highlight two important points when we're talking to you. We do believe we're singing to the choir when we share these thoughts. And we also recognize that adults don't like to be told stuff all the time. But many of us do like to be aware of norms and conventions when we're traveling to new places. So the Mindful Pilgrim card was originally offered within Canada to Canadian pilgrims with that in mind. But nevertheless, by digging a little bit deeper into the idea of how mindfulness can play a part, we hope to provide every aspiring pilgrim or even returned pilgrim something useful to ponder. And at the end of our formal remarks, we'd love to have a little bit of a discussion on maybe how Camino associations like ours can support the Camino in this way. So by way of introduction, I'm a pilgrim, an hospitalero, and I'm also the co-coordinator with Colleen of the Hamilton, Ontario chapter of the Canadian Company of Pilgrims. I'm also wearing a few other hats these days, a director on the board, outgoing chair of the communications committee, and a board liaison for our 18 chapters across predominantly English-speaking Canada. So there's actually two associations in Canada. There's the Canadian Company of Pilgrims, which we represent, and then there's also a group in Quebec, the Association du Québec à Compostelle, and together we represent the Canadian pilgrims in the broader Camino community.
So as David said, we coordinate the local chapter together, which is a lot of fun. And I'm also an editor and contributing writer for our national newsletter, Pilgrim Footprints, and one of Canada's Hospitalero trainers. That's something that is very dear to my heart. I'm part of the International Engagement Committee here with the CCoP, and I'm also working with some graduate students on a qualitative study on pilgrimage and recovery from trauma, particularly from an occupational therapy perspective and with post-traumatic growth in mind. So if anyone is interested in connecting around that, please reach out. I think our contacts will go in the chat eventually. So David and I spend a lot of our volunteer time cooking up ideas that we have no time to manifest, like a cross-border Camino with our Boston chapter friends. One of them is here. So in what little time is left over, I love to write, with one project thankfully nearly finished.
Yep, and we do love to tell and write stories. So today we're going to add a pinch of self-mocking and maybe a dash of histrionics, but we want to thank you again for the invitation to be with you today. So let's get back to this interview with Ivar. He actually posted it on his YouTube. So if you go to @Ivar, you can find that. And we were talking to him about the Mindful Pilgrim and how it goes beyond the card that we've produced. And we've been sharing the card for a few months with our friends in the wider Camino community, and we've added some elements given the international interest in the subject matter. So the card itself was inspired by discussions way back in 2019 at the annual Encuentro Jacobeo. And those discussions were partly about the environmental impact of pilgrims on the Camino. And what arose was an initiative of two past presidents of the Canadian Company of Pilgrims, Lee Pennock and Wendy Lawley. And there's a picture of them today, or a number of months ago, where Wendy's on the right in the white jacket, Lee's on the left. And I know that Wendy's on the call and she might be available to take some specific questions on this initiative that she did with Lee. And she might even explain who that handsome guy in the middle is and why she was standing with him at that point. So that's how this all kind of started. Besides the environmental load that so many more pilgrims have had on the Camino, there'd also been a lot of talk about behaviors that had been observed that were not really in the spirit of a traditional, respectful pilgrim. And so there's also the added pressure on the people who live and work along the Camino to consider. So Lee and Wendy started to develop this resource, initially designed as something Canadian pilgrims could take on their first Camino as food for thought. And since then, other associations have also independently created resources to remind us all of walking the way in a good way. So for example, American Pilgrims back in the summer, I noticed this on Instagram, I think it was between June and August, there were the 8 Pilgrim Principles, which was a series that was running on social media there for a little while. So that's one example, and there are some others which I'll touch on in a sec. So what's on our card?
So on the front, it lists, I don't know if you can see this, it's this card. It lists 3 ways to, you can be mindful. There's the way of kindness, the way of respect, and the way of openness and curiosity. David's favorite word is, he's circled the bottom there,
Yes.
is down near the bottom, is serendipity. And maybe you might agree that some of those unplanned moments can be some of our best memories. And mine is be present in the moment, which we'll talk about. Really the basis of this presentation is about this: be present in the moment, and which, as I think you noted before, is the essence of mindfulness. On the back, we have an adaptation of a pilgrim blessing that some of you will recognize as similar to the Beatitudes, although it's worded to reflect the non-denominational nature of our organization. And while originally designed for the Canadian audience, we know that other friends in the broader Camino community, beyond the American Pilgrims, have issued a variety of documents, all touching on similar ideas. For example, it's the Australians that had the Australian Association with the Code of Conduct.
Yeah, and also there was this poster that we heard about originally from Camino friend Rebecca Scott, The Values of the Camino, which gets at it's the same basic issue. For us to coexist, to be in community while being able to realize our own individual goals, it's always helpful to share some basic values. So with all of this international activity in support of the continued health of the Camino, it means it's all about caring for the people and the land where we walk, and it's also caring for each other as pilgrims along the way. So after the launch of the Mindful Pilgrim in Canada and knowing others share the same sentiments, we started sharing our version with, well, internationally, but we initially shared it with Johnny Walker, who's connected, as you probably know, to a lot of Camino groups. And that's when the conversation really broadened for us. So how do we use this card in Canada? How have we been using it and what's in the works? Well, like I said, we give one to every Canadian who buys a credential on our online store. So this is typically our new pilgrims. And so they get one of those for free. They don't have to buy it. We have dedicated a Mindful Pilgrim page on our national website, which is santiago.ca. We've also created recently a QR code which makes sharing the information easier and also paper-free, which of course respects one of the original concerns for the environment that started this initiative 6 years ago. Currently, we're also planning a laminated card with the QR code that our hospitaleros could put up wherever they're serving. And we're also thinking about maybe how the QR code could go to a multi-language web page with the Pilgrim text, the Mindful Pilgrim text reproduced there. Right now, we've got it in English, French, and of course, Spanish, with more to follow, hopefully. And lastly, there's also a presentation deck that we use, and our chapters use it in their various Camino 101s to stimulate discussion on the subject. And it comes with facilitator notes. And so on this page here that's talking about the way of respect, one of the facilitator notes talks about how do we provide a meaningful support to donativos as an example. And when we were talking to Alice, and we were talking about how, not everybody knows that donativo doesn't mean free. Right. It means something to do with, providing a responsible contribution. And so, if you didn't have that conversation before, you might not know that when you're out on your first Camino. Mm-hmm. So basically, when we were speaking to Ivar, he was kind of pointing out that 20 years ago, these kind of resources weren't even needed. His view was that people who were motivated to walk the Camino in those days already had these kinds of thoughts and values in their hearts. And nowadays, there's a much broader range of people going on the Camino with many different motivations for being there, as we'll touch on. So pilgrim associations may be looking at their roles in orienting new pilgrims a little bit differently. And we know there's a few albergues where people can get oriented on the Camino, and a couple of our favorites are in Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port, Gîte Bellari, run by Joseph, and there's another one just up the road called Porte de Saint-Jacques in Saint-Jean. They both give new pilgrims a bit of orientation to what to expect, not just in terms of tomorrow's walk up the mountain, but also in terms of some of the norms and conventions of walking in community with others. Mm-hmm. And further down the road, in Hospital de Orbigo, there's they're kind of like a hybrid. They're not like a Donativo, but they're hybridy. But they
the same.
Yeah. They share the same kind of information with people, and similarly, the Donativos would do that. But that's what happens once you're on the Camino. But not everyone gets to these really special places. So, and I know this for a fact because, truth be told, on this last Camino, which was my fourth and your third, we saw some behaviors that were just so unlike some of the things that we'd seen before. It was a bit jarring, and it made us uncharacteristically, but decidedly grumpy. But before we get to that, Colleen can pick up why we went back to the Camino in the first place.
And some of those behaviors were ours, I just should say that.
Totally.
So David and I planned on going back to Spain in September of last year to do three things. First was to lead my first group of pilgrims as part of a pilot project called Let's Walk Home, a trauma-informed, semi-supported Camino. That's part of that qualitative study I mentioned. So that was an immovable date in the calendar we were working around. And second, most excitingly, we had a secret plan to get married on September 9th. It had to be September 9th. That was a special anniversary. We had a place that we feel is a sacred place on the Camino sorted out for that with just a couple of pilgrim friends. So that required some contortions. And then third was to walk the San Salvador and the Primitivo at the end of the month for our honeymoon. Who does that as a honeymoon? That's a bad idea. Anyway, we got injured almost immediately. Long, boring story. But I think we got injured because the Camino is telling us we should go to the Amalfi Coast for our honeymoon. That's my feeling anyway. So we didn't listen and ended up fighting reality for several days and ended up back on the Frances. And instead, our 3-day honeymoon was spent recovering in the stone boat in Rabanal, which is very kind of Kim, and she temporarily renamed it the Love Boat. Yeah. So the long and the short of it was we were all over the place. We started in Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port. We walked for a bit, got in a car, drove to where we planned to get married, zipped back to Lyon to return the car to begin the San Salvador, which lasted precisely 1 day before injury stopped us. Then we took the train to Oviedo to get some treatment to begin the Primitivo. The Primitivo was all booked, as was the Portuguese, and we were not sure about the Norte, and we decided enough was enough. So we returned to Lyon by train to walk the Frances again, which we did for about a week, finally ending up in A Coruña, which is lovely, by bus, via Lugo, which is also lovely, also by bus, to walk the Ingles, which was never our intention.
No.
And at any point during this nonsense, we could have gotten on an EasyJet to an actual honeymoon, and we didn't, and that's on us. Or maybe that's on you.
Maybe on me.
Yeah.
So during the month of wandering around, we experienced what we called incivility, but Kim Stoneboat gently, and I think correctly, reframed as unconscious behavior. And we'd seen more of it than at any other time in past Caminos, and it was awkward because we knew we were going to be going down to visit Ivar and talk about this mindful Pilgrim initiative, and things going poorly enough that we both became a bit disenchanted with the Camino, and it wasn't going to be terribly motivational.
Not terribly.
So one instance was on the San Salvador, which was our first and only night there, injured and exhausted, when Colleen was shaken awake in a dark Alberti well after 10 p.m. by the hospitalera to be sure she was paid.
Physically shaken.
So jarring to say the very least.
Yeah.
Another time, a busload of about 50 people piled out to the little chapel in Osabrero, but they had to be quieted by the gentle priest there. One of them was actually yodeling to test the acoustics. He was yodeling next to the baptismal font.
He was yodeling in the baptismal font.
He was crazy.
Yeah.
So another time, after a string of minor but more frequent encounters with other inconsiderate people, I was standing in the streets of Ravenel when a peloton of yellow e-bikes, complete with a support car following from behind, flowed like a wave through the narrow street, flooding the space and nudging the backpack-wearing walkers out of the way. And thus began a mini rant. I had started to have enough of incivility by this point, and these people had absolutely no idea who they were sharing the path with. Well, at least that was the story in my shaking head. Eventually, we got to the Ingles and encountered a lovely Irishman named Lionel, and he was also a long-term pilgrim. And he too had said he'd encountered some egregious behavior, not at all what he was used to on the Camino. And he went so far as to say the Camino had lost its soul. Very dramatic. But by now, we were only days from Santiago, and we were starting to feel like we were those grumpy Muppets in the balcony, Waldorf and Stadler.
Yeah, the e-bike, the Ravenel e-bike incident was a real eye-opener, and it was not a mini rant. I was there. So I'm sitting on the south side of the road, and David's on the north, on the bench next to the Stoneboat, and I'm taking a video of Luna, the resident cat, saucy little cat that lives there, and she's curling herself around the table legs and stretching out into the sun as cats do. And we were having a lovely afternoon enjoying the sun. Well, the cat and I were anyway. So I panned over to David, expecting to catch you enjoying the sun. And there he was, scowling and rambling about the incivility of this team of e-bikes that had just passed, which led to an airing of all the accumulated grievances up to this point. So I do what any good wife would do with
4 days of experience.
4 days experience.
Pretty much.
And I capture the whole colorful rant on my phone, secretly wondering how I can use it later, because that's kind. And as I'm doing that, a pilgrim leapt into the frame like a sprite, laughing. She stopped to have a chat with us. Her name was, to see what all the grumbling was about, because she was confused what was going on. Julie from California, lovely,
nice.
Lovely person, walking on her own, managing to have a reflective Camino in the busy month of September, which is saying something. And as we were talking, the e-bike tour support van passed by, and David began anew about these pseudo pilgrimages, and she said with all equanimity, they're just on holiday. You know, not everybody you see on the Frances is on pilgrimage. There's nothing wrong with that. And then she said,
Oh yeah, she said they're probably already up at Foncy-Banon by now. And what are you still hanging on to them for? Why give up your lovely afternoon for that?
Yeah, which is a great question. So I think we got into this conversation about wishing all well, compassion without exception, and how judging others just drains your energy and wastes your time. And we all know that. It comes down to choosing where to put our attention, on the e-bikes that are off on their own adventure, or on our present moment, which is all we have.
And I knew it was sage advice, and I did take it to heart, feeling very sheepish that I'd let myself get so wound up. And of course, the California Sprite was reminding me of the obvious. These days, there are all kinds of people on the Camino, and they're certainly not all experienced pilgrims. Some are new with the benefit of a great Camino 101 experience from one of our associations. Some come in groups of various sorts, like the Turugrinos in the colorful shirts and the comfy buses, and that's how they're doing maybe their first Camino. And some are just plain old tourists, maybe like that pushy Peloton. Well, I wasn't done being a Muppet yet. Um, 3/4 of the way up the mountain to Osobrero, I don't know if you know this, it's a nice, gentle, well, some say it's not so gentle, but it's a beautiful,
Yeah, it's
beautiful open landscape. It's nice and quiet. And the only problem was I could hear about a kilometer away this really, really noisy gaggle of what I'd call tourists in pristine, very expensive looking hiking gear, led by their tour guide. And they were carrying on laughing and hollering like pretty loudly, which is fine. But then I realized one of them was operating a handheld drone that was buzzing all around us, which is basically a selfie stick with wings. So I know a number of us would be familiar with the Walk with a Friend videos that he does with his drone. This was not that. I was so irritated. They had no idea what this ancient path was all about. And here they are, walking up to what some people would call the heart of the Camino, where Don Elias Valinia himself, original painter of those yellow arrows that we follow, staked his claim in the wind and snow-swept village of Osobrero to virtually single-handedly resurrect the Camino in the 1980s.
Self-righteous and indignant.
Big time.
Also uncomfortable, we know. There were a lot of those moments. We're only giving you the lowlights. And I find it fascinating that we knew we were going to talk to Ivar about the Mindful Pilgrim. And we were met with every possible bit of mindless behavior, including and especially our own. Life is a classroom. But the most outrageous, jaw-dropping example was the guy in Osobrero that we mentioned in our conversation with Ivar on YouTube. And we had earplugs in. We do not expect silence in communal sleeping situations, but we woke at 5 a.m. to this man unpacking and repacking his bag for 45 minutes on his bed, in between two sleeping humans. Everything came out of the bag, everything went into the bag, rustle, rustle, rustle. David sitting across from this man, staring at him, which was also uncomfortable. Anyway, if you've traveled with a pack before, you know there isn't enough in it to entertain you for 45 minutes. So we were perplexed. We kept thinking, okay, he's going to finish and leave for the trail. But no, he actually put on his headlamp and started waving it around to make sure he had collected absolutely everything. I've not really seen anything quite that dramatic in terms of packing in a dorm. Anyway, by the time he left, we saw the whole dorm one by one wake up, look around for the commotion, and then just get up and leave. So maybe this is a good time to talk about mindfulness. And listen, we do not profess to be subject matter experts, but we're longtime Buddhist practitioners, not very good ones, and students. So we do have some background that may be helpful to share, but forgive us if you're already familiar. So the word mindfulness is widespread now, and it's hard to find someone not familiar with it, particularly widespread in the therapeutic capacity. Some of you may be familiar with mindfulness-based stress reduction, which I think was born in Massachusetts, which is excellent, by the way. I've done it myself. But we should remember that we've borrowed the word mindfulness from an earlier tradition such as Buddhism. And when we borrow things one at a time from another tradition, sometimes concepts can become fragmented or watered down. And the danger is that deeper dimensions can get lost, such as compassion or the understanding of interdependence, which is very important in the Camino, and as Ivar said, on every other day, which was a great point. In the Buddhist tradition, mindfulness is sometimes said to be one wing of the dove, and the other is compassion. They're meant to work together like wings to lift you. And when mindfulness and compassion are combined, they foster wisdom, an understanding of how to respond to suffering skillfully and effectively. So in traditional practice for practitioners of Dharma, the ultimate goal is enlightenment. And as you might imagine, David and I keep our spiritual goals quite a bit lower to the ground. But so even if you're not aiming for full enlightenment, I think we'd all like a peaceful life, peaceful mind, good relationships, and mindfulness helps us with that. It helps us know when and how to act because we train ourselves to see clearly. And having compassion motivates us to act out of an unconditional wish for the well being of all. Compassion without exception, as Julie reminded us, the sprite from the thing. And it's another one that sounds easier than it is.
And it isn't so much about being nice or trying to avoid unpleasant emotions or thoughts. Mindfulness at its core is the practice of being fully present, aware of what's happening right now without distraction, without judgment, engaging with life as it unfolds in a way that's intentional. It involves cultivating an attitude of openness, curiosity, and acceptance. And as it happens, all of these are points on the Mindful Pilgrim card. The very first step in practicing mindfulness is learning to be present, grounding yourself in the current moment, not worrying about the past or the future. And the key to being present is actually paying attention, which sounds simple, but it's a skill that takes practice, moment by moment practice. And so all of us can very easily go on autopilot, not really noticing what's happening all around us. And I was certainly offering up a masterclass on that point.
So thinking back to our friend in Osabrero, he was probably a very nice person. He smiled and wished you buen camino as he ran out of the albergue, leaving behind him a bit of a wake of irritation. But I believe he wasn't even aware that there were other people in the room with him, though it seems improbable because he would have had to see them 20 other beds when he went to bed. But he was completely unconscious, not present. His mind was not in that moment. His mind was, and we have to take a guess here, 2 hours down the road. When am I going to need my foot grease? Where should I put it in my bag? Where shall I put my snacks to keep them handy? Where is my cheese? Anxiety about getting a bed, which is hours down the road. And meanwhile, he's ripping his bag apart on the bed. So it's impossible for him to act in a way that's compassionate to alleviate the suffering of others, of us, and the other sleeping people, because he doesn't know we're there. And this is the thing. I think this happens to all of us a lot. We're simply not here. So the first step in mindfulness is to show up to the present moment and pay attention. You make a deliberate effort to bring your attention back to the here and now. It could mean refocusing your breath or listening to the sounds around you. It's a persistent but gentle refocusing, drawing your attention back to be here now.
So those are the first steps on the path to seeing clearly, seeing things as they truly are without labels or judgments. And that allows us to choose better actions. And in a way, mindfulness is like wiping fog off your windshield. And here's the beautiful thing. We say it's a practice, not a perfection. We are not always fully present. That's okay. That's not the goal. The goal is simply to keep coming back to the present moment over and over again with kindness and patience toward yourself and others. Bringing yourself back to the present moment again and again helps catch yourself quicker the next time when you're adrift.
And we all go adrift.
Yep.
As I think we've pointed out. So for example, let's call him Harry. He needs a name. Our friend in Osabrero. He might have woken up with some anxiety and started pulling apart his bag. And I think most of us have been there, know what that feels like. But at any moment during that 45 minutes, he might have refocused himself to remember where he was, look around. Hey, I'm standing in a dark room. These people seem to be sleeping and I'm waving my headlamp around. Then he would have the opportunity, once he recognizes that, he would have the opportunity to make a new choice, collect his bag and take it to the lobby and wrestle with it out there. Perfectly fine. You just keep coming back to the present moment, and the rewards are hopefully people get less annoyed by us, and we in turn get less annoyed by others. Win-win. I never say that right. So we're not ever going to be perfect, and I am forever, and I know you've heard this, I am forever going through a quiet room, purposefully taking everything very carefully, and something heavy falls out of my bag. I hate myself when it happens. It just happens. So we do our best. And communal living is not really, I don't think, familiar to most of us anymore. We have to relearn it, which is one enormous benefit of our chapters, is preparing people. I think it would be a shame for be ashamed to have the albergues become so inhospitable that people don't want to stay. And we hear this more and more now. I don't think it's true, and we do stay mostly in albergues, but it's a story out there, and there's more of this now. So perhaps there's a risk people hear this and they choose to avoid the experience. But for me, this is one of the most healing parts of the Camino, that traditional hospitality, the sense of belonging you get. Look at these people having dinner here. Relearning how to share space, sharing meals, the communitas that you immerse yourself in donativos and some of those special albergues. It's beautiful. And for me, the Camino wouldn't be the same without it. So it would be a shame to lose that, at least as an option. And this is part of the reason that I think it's important for all of our organizations to stay strong and keep reaching out in ways like this.
So shortly after the encounter with Lost Soul Lionel, and in contrast to those yodeling yokels, things actually did turn around, back to the familiar spirit we'd always known on the Camino. And our arrival at Casa Avelina restored our faith. So there's a lovely woman who greeted us. She took our ponchos and soaking wet raincoats, stuck them on the coat rack. She took our cafe con leche order, gave us some cookies, even pulled out 2 little stools for us to rest our weary feet. She was so sweet. We felt so tended, and she saw us. She saw pilgrims, and we were grateful. We were not demanding, and we were only too happy to push in our chairs, leave our table tidy, and of course, leave a generous tip as we left. And so despite navigating more rapids than usual in the river of love, as we love to call the Camino, the last kilometers into Santiago were a gentle caress as we walked through the Bosque Encantado, the enchanted forest. This was the familiar Galician embrace, and just as verdant Galicia had welcomed us many times before, we knew we were on hallowed ground. We knew we were at home, and the Camino was full of that Celtic magic, and we were again feeling that in our souls. Now, the arrival into Santiago from the north is a treat if you haven't tried it, and if you haven't come into the center that way. This was our first time. The narrow roads were especially quiet that Sunday morning. It was around 10:30 because it was Sunday. The church bells were ringing. And so taking a right-hand turn from this little alley, you join the main road to the archway. And we heard the pipes. And as a piper myself, I get out my phone, full tourist mode, and I record our steps to the arch. And in this anything but mindful state, I completely miss the fact that we're passing someone we plan to reconnect with. And Colleen goes, "Hey, isn't that Johnny?" And I go, "Where?" And I go, "Oh yeah, well, we were walking right past Johnny Walker Santiago." And so we double back, we catch up to him and Father Stephen, because the two of them were walking off to the Sunday service. And we exchanged greetings and shared our big wedding news with him. And John said he was delighted, having heard recently of a Croatian couple that had also had a Camino wedding. And Father Stephen offered us a blessing, which we gladly accepted in the middle of the road to the cathedral square.
That was pretty sweet.
So this is the "you can't write this stuff" return, not just to Santiago, but also to our pilgrim spirits. This was what we always knew to be the way, and of course it still is. And over these last centuries and those to come, that spirit will remain. We may simply need to remember to be mindful pilgrims as we walk the way. So, Allison, we thought we'd keep our remarks short, but we would like to continue with a bit of discussion on a couple of questions. But maybe in the meantime, I don't know, have there been any questions show up in the chat that you wanted to address first?
Yes, we did have somebody who said, "Could you please explain what you mean by the Primitivo was all booked when you guys had to make your change in plans?"
Well,
set up some alarm bells.
Right. So we usually don't book anything.
We don't book much.
We don't book much.
We do book something.
Yeah. So we're not generally calling ahead to find out what's going on, but we were traveling on the Camino. Yeah. The Camino was at the busiest time of the busiest year. And it turns out that just trying to investigate what was going on, we found a couple of places that you would pretty much have to hit on the Primitivo. and maybe a couple that we'd like to see on the Norte. And we discovered that things were unusually busy, and we're not
also
feeling
in-
full of our usual reserve, and
Yeah.
so there was just enough to sort of dissuade us from trying to be too adventurous at that point. So I wouldn't want to suggest really that it was truly full. I think there were lots of spaces probably. It was just that at that point we were
For
kind of
us.
a little bit worn out, and we thought, okay, what are we going to do? Let's go find puppies and hammocks at Hospital de Orbigo on the Frances, because we know that's a good restart.
Yeah, I mean, it could be that we could have done the Primitivo if we were in shape to be able to walk an extra 15 kilometers if we
Right.
had to. But there's a couple of spots on the Primitivo that you want to be careful about, where you're going to stay. And if we're also injured,
Yeah.
we thought we were having enough trouble at that point. We were looking for something smooth.
Right.
So
So hopefully that answers
Yeah.
your question.
What time of year was it that y'all are walking?
September.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
like we started early September.
Hmm.
And it was busy, but I somebody who started out with us, she walked the whole way. I think she only reserved once, and she went right to the ocean. So
Yeah.
I mean, and she started in early September. So it depends on what kind of places you want to stay. Do you mind if every once in a while you stay in a place that you'd rather not stay? So it can be done.
Yeah.
It's
And that's usually been our experience, even
It's just a
even
little
in busy
busier.
times, we usually can find a way to um,
And
avoid
then-
the crowds if we want to avoid the crowds, or get in the mix if we want to do that too.
Well, and on the Frances, there's more
Yeah, more
options. So if you're injured and then walking into the mountains when there's not a lot of options, we thought that might not be
Might
very
not be
smart.
such a good idea.
So,
Which is probably a good reason I was with Colleen, because if I'd
You
been
would've
left to
gone.
my own devices,
You would've
I would have
gone.
been stupidly going for it. So anyway, any other questions, Allison?
We've got a couple, but I think we can get those in the chat. Well, sorry, we just had one come in. My last Camino was in fall of 21. Is there a noticeable difference in pilgrim attitudes and behavior?
I think it's I think we just hit I think we just had a little bit of bad luck. I don't honestly believe that the experience on walking the Caminos is materially different than what we've seen before. But I do believe that, like in these last 10 years, there's been some changes with, like we said earlier, there's a lot of folks walking for a variety of different reasons, and so I mean, with every passing year, there will be more that may not have had an experience like what we offer our members in our various chapters to get oriented. They might not have encountered the Josephs in Bellari, and some of these other folks that help in a very gentle way orient you to what life on the Camino is all about. I mean, actually, it's funny. It happens in a lot of different ways, and it'd be interesting to get your perspectives on how people learn about the way along the way. But I think of my very first Camino 10 years ago, and it was day one, and I just happened to be walking with a couple of Irish brothers, and we were really chatty. And there was this guy up ahead who shushed us, and I didn't understand that as a brand new pilgrim. I hadn't actually ever done a Camino 1010 at that point, but that was probably my first little orientation lesson in, hey, you know what? There's other people around you, and they're actually here for a contemplative walk. You guys are having this grand old time chitter chattering as new Camino enthusiasts, but it happens in a variety of different ways. So,
and I
Well,
wonder,
we did-
like a little bit of that is, I think what we were with Julie. She was walking during that same time. The person we just met, that one moment, she wasn't. We were having very different experiences, but a lot of that is what we were bringing to our experience, which was grumpiness. So there is a little bit of that, but I mean, when resources are tight, it can lead to flaring tempers, which is that the Irish guy, not Lionel, but Patrick, who was making these videos. They were just,
Oh
they
yeah,
were funny videos.
they were parodies of
what he was saying,
bad behavior.
you know, bed races, and he did one that was 6 pilgrims auditioning for the last bed in an albergue and pulling each other's backpacks. So, I mean, that's not really happening, but like it's but a lot of it is what you bring to it. But I think when it's crowded, it can be, tempers can be a little bit.
Well, I don't know about temper so
Not
much as
tempers.
you know, I mean, we love going back again and again and again, and you know, just every now and again you'll encounter something, and maybe it's partly because I think you sort of touched on it, because we were sort of jumping around. We weren't actually in our usual flow, walking
Yeah.
linearly along the Camino.
We never got into a rhythm.
Yeah, so we might have been perceiving things in a little bit different kind of a way than we normally would. But getting back to the question, no, I think, you know what, no matter where you are in the world, you're going to see some folks doing things that maybe you wish they weren't. But all in all, I love being on the Camino because people are very caring most of the time, very considerate most of the time, and every now and again there's an exception.
So speaking of the jumping from route to routes, we had a question. Do you find differences in mindfulness and pilgrim behavior on different routes?
That's a great question.
I'm gonna say I've got a knee-jerk reaction to that
You got a
question.
knee-jerk reaction?
Yeah,
we're consulting each other here, but out loud, so this isn't working really well. So, but okay.
Well, I'm gonna guess. I'm gonna take a guess.
You step your foot in first.
I'm gonna take a guess that routes like the Via de la Plata and some of the quieter routes like the San Salvador will be similar to what Ivar was talking about in terms of the nature of the pilgrims that are walking on those routes. It might be more like say 20 years ago, when if you're going to go on some of those lesser walked routes, you've probably been on one of the popular ones before, and so you are much more acquainted with pilgrim life, and you're probably walking with that experience on these lesser traveled routes, and that'd be my guess. I would bet that there's a and I was reading about this actually yesterday. There was somebody doing a really good summary of the Via de la Plata, the comparison between the Frances and the Via de la Plata as an example. And I'm going to say, yeah, maybe that's true. Maybe there's a little bit more of a contemplative nature to the pilgrims that are on those kind of lesser traveled routes versus
because they're looking for that.
Yeah, they're looking for a little bit more solitude, perhaps, than say on busy stretches of the Frances. But I mean, I've been on the Frances a number of times. I can always find quiet. There's no question. There's an art, and maybe it's a little bit more challenging in certain places along the way these days, but you can always find it, I believe.
So we had another question. Your message is important and resonating with folks in the chat. There is a question about how you plan to share it, especially by to Americans with Americans. And there's also information about from the Santiago Department of Tourism that is sustainable tourism that seems to align with your views. So how do y'all plan to continue to share it?
That's great. Should we bring in Wendy?
What was the first part of the comment there, Allison? I missed a little bit of that before the.
Yeah, so your message is resonating, and people are asking how you plan to share it. It's especially needed by Americans like me, and then that the conversation y'all are having is similar to what the Santiago Department of Tourism is also saying.
I see. Okay, gotcha. Actually, I guess I could stop sharing my screen. I forgot I was still doing that. Sorry about that.
Is Wendy still on the call? I don't know. Does she have a?
Yes, I see Wendy. Hey, Wendy, how are you doing?
Hi. Good, thanks.
Yeah. Well, we've got a few things that are in the hopper. One is in the works. We've got a program to train people to be hospitaleros in albergues, and one of the people who's trained hospitalero, and she also happens to be on our communications committee, Nadia Marshy. She's working up a version of this that could be simply something that you could put up near your desk as you sign people in, maybe with a QR code, and then that way you can share some of the ideas on the way. She makes a really good point, by the way, that without the context of this is a these are this the only these this stuff came about only because of observations of things that are going on. We wouldn't have produced it. You guys wouldn't have produced the 8 Pilgrim Principles. Australia wouldn't have done theirs. There's just some conversation going on, and so people are offering their own different takes on something that is intended to reinforce that traditional pilgrim spirit. So that's one way for us to share it in the future. But we're open to suggestions, because we're not the only ones talking about it, as we pointed out. There's a lot of different associations touching on it. What about you, Wendy? What do you think?
I just thought we could, I just mentioned how we are sharing it with Canadian pilgrims. David mentioned already, we send out the Mindful Pilgrim card with every credential, but we've also produced a 12-slide PowerPoint presentation that can be used within the chapters and at Camino 101s and things like that. And it's all one package. It's fairly brief. It asks the questions and then encourages discussion amongst the attendees as to ways that they can think of to be kind or respectful or to be open to the community. And it includes facilitator notes that help the chapter coordinator or the person running the session to have some ready ideas to help stimulate the conversation. So, and David mentioned I just sent out a pack of Mindful Pilgrim cards to go to all our departing hospitaleros, and they'll go to the folks that are training to be hospitaleros as well, and putting up the posters, trying to hit it in Spain as well as in Canada.
Allison, are you aware, or Joe, are there any things going on with the American pilgrims, building on like maybe the 8 principles or other things that you guys have been talking about in this light?
Yeah, I'll say briefly that we are, as y'all are talking about too, very aware of the growing number of folks that are walking, which, as is in the chat and you guys have mentioned too, there's some differences that come with walking when there's more and more people. With that, from the board perspective, I'll throw it to Joe so he could talk about maybe some of the things that we're looking at as well.
Yeah, I mean, we haven't formally pushed out those Pilgrim principles, I think, in a while. We use them as kind of a guide for the board's behavior, actually, and our kind of level setting.
We'll take it up here, Joe.
What's that?
We'll take it up here too.
No, it's just kind of, it's a level set. It's a level set for us. But it's I think it's worthwhile. That's why we've kind of been looking to your example, and I know that Johnny Walker had his initiative, and he had sent that along to us as well, and we've discussed that a little bit, but we haven't carried that forward so much. So looking a lot to your example.
Yeah, well, and it's just we're one of several, as we mentioned. I think without the context of stating that over time in these last years there have been more examples of things that just don't sit as good examples of good behavior. People have talked about it a little bit more. Not to say that that walking on the Camino is not just as great as it's always been, but there's just been a little bit more observation, and that's it. We're just offering a Canadian take on something that others are talking about as well. But of course the danger is always, you don't want to for a second sound teachy or preachy, right? So there's it's an offering to our new pilgrims in particular, and a sharing with the international Camino community to the extent that they're interested in the conversation.
Yeah, yeah. And I know there's interest in it. When we did our board update a month ago, I know there was some questions about this too, and trying to help, maybe in the course of some of our Camino 101s or our national events to talk a little bit more about kind of some just expectations or etiquette around behavior.
And the PowerPoint deck is great, for being able to unpack things a little bit with new pilgrims. And I think if there's a way to add on a sketch comedy portion, I think, in terms of not being teachy preachy, like, so we can poke fun at ourselves a little bit, so people can actually see what happens when you unpack your bag for 45 minutes. Not that it would be 45 minutes, but it's just another way for I think for the information to land in a good way, because I think most people want to know how to do it. How do I do this in a good way? Nobody wants to be that guy, so I think finding a way that people can receive it is good. Yeah.
Hey, lots of great art comes out of the Camino, so who knows what you've just spurred on, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, because I don't know about your Hospitalero training, but our Hospitalero training programs, we do role playing. So now you mentioned that, it gets my wheels turning.
That is the best. And I tell you, the Hospitaleros say that is one of the most useful parts of the train. It's all useful, but really seeing a situation, I think, is really helpful. And if you can do it in a way that's lighthearted, nobody's getting shamed, that's great. And so we could write up little scenarios and do it after the PowerPoint presentation and have people role play. It'd be fun.
I will say that in the chat, I did put a link to American Pilgrims Hospitalero training if you're interested in taking it. I will say that they do fill up quite fast. So the dates are out there if you're interested. But I did want to point people to that too. I do want to say we have about 5-ish more minutes. Does anybody, or David and Colleen, do you want to take questions from the group, or where do you want to go from here?
Yeah, sure. Happy to take any other questions. I haven't been monitoring the chat, so
I think we're caught up in the chat. So if anybody wants to put
Okay.
another question in the chat or take yourself off mute, feel free to do that.
And the other thing too is we're just interested in, we're interested just generally on, I actually it'd be interesting if there's any anecdotes from anybody of situations that you've been in where you or maybe somebody else might have hopefully gently offered an alternative approach to doing something that was maybe causing some grief in an albergue or somewhere along the way. So if you've got any anecdotes along those lines, I think we're all interested in learning the gentle way. It looks like Kathleen.
Kathleen.
You got your hand up.
Yeah, I was thinking that probably a really good thing to do is find a way to set up your pack so you don't have to make a bunch of noise in the morning. Like, because I've had that problem, and I just had to gather all my stuff and I couldn't find it. It was dark, and you know what I mean? It's like, if you could just set it up before you go to bed so you can just grab it and leave, that might be good.
And Kathleen, as you were saying, you just ran on the Camino without really much preparation. I don't travel like that. So I went to a couple of Camino 101s, but I had to see how people pack their bag because that's not familiar to me. I mean, I don't know how you live out of a bag. How do you find your stuff? And, so if you're right, like that's not information that we all have, right? So we learn that at Camino 101 or, I don't know if the books talk about that, but you're absolutely right.
We did have a question. The hard thing is telling someone else. How do we gently remind others?
I'm intrigued by this question. I do not have the answer. I've only in 10 years on 4 Caminos ever, only twice have I ever intervened. I think I've done it in a reasonable way, but I have no doubt that there would have been a better artful way to do it. So I'm intrigued by the question. I'd love to know if there's good ways that people have used in the past. We did hear about one.
Well, I've told you that I can't remember the exact situation, but I remember watching another woman. What she was really doing was modeling, and she was doing it so gently, like us, mindful, like,
Yeah.
oh, this woman doesn't know that this is the way you do things, and she was able to help her, get more information. She was
Right.
able to model and
Mhm.
say, oh, well, the plug is over here, or whatever it was. She did it in such an artful way.
Yeah.
It was wonderful, and I thought. And meanwhile, I'm steaming. But so I think that's the way to go. I think, but it's tricky.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah. No, I think that's the
those
question. It's a
strollers.
great question, and of course we're poking a lot of fun at ourselves.
Yeah,
we're
we're not that
generally
bad.
running around pissed off at everybody all the time, but
We're on the occasional Muppets. Yeah.
Yeah, I struggle with that too. I think I try to do it in a spirit of they may not know, and I just really
yes,
try to, like, I also didn't know. I landed in Spain and took a left. I mean, that I did not know what I was doing. And so I'm really grateful for the people who helped me. And so I guess I try to remember that, but it's so hard sometimes.
yeah. Well, when I started studying Buddhism a number of years ago, the one thing that really struck me that helped me with all of this is, and you sort of touched on it right there, Allison, this notion of compassion. If I ask myself a little bit about what they must be, what's their reality right now, and look at them with some compassion, it changes the game entirely for me. I realize that I always know I don't know what's in their mind. I have no idea what their day started out like. But when I start with compassion, then I'm not able to judge. I'm not able to react in a foolhardy way. And as Ivar said, maybe say things that put us on a bad path because we're reacting in a bad way. So I see we're getting close to the top of the hour, but that would be my
Yes.
second favorite word is compassion.
Yes, and I want to say a huge thank you to y'all. I think we've answered all the questions in the chat, and we've got some great questions and resources and things that have been in there. If anybody has any need or any desire to connect with them, I did put their contact information in there. You can also find them via the Canadian Company of Pilgrims. You can connect with them that way. But we are really grateful for y'all's time, David and Colleen. Also, pilgrims who came, we appreciate it. We will post this on our YouTube page. So if somebody in your chapter or in your pilgrim group did not get to see it, you can send it to them as well. So we are really grateful. And with that, we will say a buen camino to everyone.
Buen Camino.
Buen Camino.
Thank you.
See you in Vancouver.
Good to see you guys.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
See you, Joe.
Pleasure.
Bye-bye.
Bye, Laura. Bye, Sarah.
Bye, y'all.